Welcome to Aircrew Interview. I'm Mike and your host. In this interview, we chat with former CH-46 Sea Knight pilot Hugh Brien. Hugh chats about what it was like to become a helicopter pilot, the role of the Sea Knight, and generally just shares some brilliant stories from his flying career. If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like to support the channel, you can do this by helping us out monthly at patreon.com/aircrew interview, which allows us to continue to create new content every month and grow as a channel. I also want to thank our sponsor, Laco Watches, who were one of the original companies to produce pilot watches for the Luftwaffe during World War II. They produce both A and B dial watches in different sizes to suit all tastes, which adopt the look of times gone by but still satisfied modern demands. You can check out all their models and products via www.laco.d. Thank you. So, Hugh, when did you first become interested in aviation?
You know, it didn't happen until later in life. Actually, when I was in high school, one of my good friends this is going to sound so cliche, but he took me to see Top Gun.
Ah, yes.
And, you know, for guys who are in their maybe late 40s, early 50s, and who are, graduates who have like what we call it in the Navy, we call year group. You know, I was year group 88, the year you graduated college or got your commission. And then what happened is when I got to college, I managed to go on a summer. I was in Navy ROTC at the Virginia Military Institute, and one summer between my sophomore and my second and third year, we got a trip down to Kingsville, Texas, down to Beeville and Kingsville. And I got a ride in the backseat of an A4, a TA4J, on literally an air combat maneuver instruction hop. Wow. So I'm sitting in the back of this thing, and he's like, "Well, I hope you don't get sick." I go, "Well, I've never been sick on a roller coaster before." He goes, This is going to be a little different." But I tell you what, it was super fun, and I had a great time. It was one of those things, and this still happens today. When I fly for fun, civilian on the side, and my adrenaline, you get out of an airplane after flying for an hour or two, you just feel good. And I think that's part of the people. I don't know if people talk about that much, but I know just even as a pilot flying Cessnas, and whatever, I literally get adrenaline hits from flying airplanes, and I think that's also the part. The really falling in love with it was, going around and flying fast and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Hugh, let's talk about some of your basic training. Where did you start and what aircraft did you fly? Absolutely.
So I got in my new car that I bought, of course, what we call the Ensign Mobile. I bought a 1985 300ZX Turbo. It was really fast for the day. Drove down through Alabama down to Pensacola and started aviation in dock. It would have been probably the end of May of 1988. So the way Navy flight training worked back then, and I think it's the same now. If you're a ROTC graduate or a Naval Academy grad, you go through 6 weeks of aviation in dock, which is three classes: aerodynamics, engines, and navigation. It's search and rescue stuff, survival training, CPR, swim a mile in your flight suit and your gear, or 500 yards, whatever it was. It was just a cluster F in the pool. Everyone's kicking, but you had to swim. We did boxing, believe it or not. We actually did boxing for a week.
Okay.
Most of it wasn't really hard. It just was busy. You were busy, and I did pretty well in that class. After the 6 weeks of in-dock, we did, I think the hardest thing we did was that obstacle course on that loose sand. They had an obstacle course down there, which is brutal if you were kind of not working out as much as you should have. And then after that, you would go to T-34, Charlie ground school, which I believe was 2 weeks or a month. My memory's not as good as it used to be, but by August, I was in primary flight training in T-34s, which was a great airplane. I did that, so that would have been August through Christmas, and then I started helicopter training in January. Did that. That took a little longer, 6 months. Then came back, did intermediate flight training, which was about a month and a half, 2 months. That was just advanced navigation in the T-34. a lot more radio instrument training. And then I started helicopters probably in March, which was the old Bell 206, the TH-57 Jet Ranger, and then finished up, graduated in August. So I literally got through flight training in a year. So I had my wings of gold while I was still an ensign, which was pretty cool.
That is cool. So
yeah,
when you got your wings of gold, did you have an aircraft or helicopter that you wanted to go on to?
When I got the selection process occurs after primary. So you go through primary and then they let you pick what aircraft you would like, on the preference sheet. Yep. Now the selection month, a lot of guys will say, well, they didn't have jets that time. As I recall, just because no one got them, right? There might have been one or two guys that selected jets in my winging, in my primary class, but not too many, if I recall. My rationale was when I went through and looked at all the syllabus, I didn't want to fly P3s because I figured that would be boring. Going a maritime track, multi-engine C-130s or P3s, that just seemed like boring, and I wanted to deploy. Jets were cool, but jets was way harder. I mean, just in terms of time. I mean, when I thought about it, I looked at it and I said, boy, I barely got into flight school, right? I shouldn't have never been there in the first place. And I really did the math and I was like, okay, everyone I talked to in helicopters says it's not hard. It's not as hard as jet training. It's not. You don't have to go do carrier quals, right? You don't have to go land on the boat. We did land on a boat, but it was just landing a Jet Ranger on a barge in the bay. But it was really just a calculation of how good of a pilot I was, where did I fall in? And I was pretty good, I thought, but I was so risk averse at the time. Now, looking back on it now, I would love to go do that training now. I mean, I know I could land on the boat. I ended up being a really good pilot in my estimation. I mean, but I'm very competent. You fly your numbers anyway. So yeah, I chickened out basically. I'll be honest with you. Right. However, that being said, flying helicopters though, on the other hand, I can get into that later, but that was the rationale. So then when I got my wings, which was August 18th, 1989, and just a day I'll never forget. And my ROTC instructor flew down to Pensacola and pinned my wings on me. So that was Commander Getzinger, the guy who kind of helped me out. And then when you pick your helicopters, what had happened was at the time, anti-submarine warfare was a big thing. And again, that was one of those things that you didn't get to do it as much as you would have liked. I talked to a bunch of guys. They said, go fly CH-46s. You're delivering the mail, but it's the best job there is. And he goes, you do what you do your mission every day, and it's a lot of stick and rudder flying, slinging loads between the aircraft carrier and other ships. I landed on probably every ship you could imagine in the Navy, right? Going on logistics runs, especially during Desert Storm. So that was the rationale, and I picked West Coast, and I got both of them. So that was a good testament. And then when at my winging, Commander Catone actually read out the fact that I had no downs in flight training, which was pretty cool. Right after I graduated from flight school in August, I had to report to San Diego in November of '89. And that's where you went through what they called the Fleet Replacement Squadron, or the old terminology was the RAG, the Replacement Air Group. And that's where you would transition. They still exist today. They're squadrons designed to take folks from training, from primary flight, get them back in. But also, if you've been out of the aircraft for a while, they will send guys, more senior officers back through the RAG or the FRS to get refreshed, right, to get retrained if they've been on a shore duty for a while. Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 3, and it was there in NAS North Island, San Diego. It went from, November through April of '90. It's about 4 months. A lot of it was learning the aircraft, which you can see here over my shoulder. Systems. It's you had to go to Sere Training, which was just hard. That was the hardest thing you had to do, because back then in Warner Springs, the Sere Training was tough. We did that, and a couple other schools. I think we had a couple other schools in there, and then it was just fly, learn the aircraft inside and out, and everything happened pretty quick. So there weren't that many flights like you had in flight school, where everything was, you literally had to get in there and take care of business. But it was all basic stuff, learning the aircraft, doing shipboard landing patterns. We even did what we call rocks and blocks, where you pick up loads. We even did ship landings. We did ship land. No nighttime ship landings. That was when you learned on the job. I was assigned to HC-11, Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 11, which was in the hangar, literally in the next building. You literally walked across the bridge that connected the two squadrons, and then I reported to my next duty station, which would have been in April of '90. So yeah.
Wow. So what was the aircraft initially designed for? Was it like a jack of all trades, master of none?
Yeah, I think, well, cargo. The thing about the 46 was that, it had a ramp in the back. You could roll pallets. It was designed to, you could put 4 or 5 pallets in the back of a 46, which if you have to fly over water at night, you don't want to sling load that stuff. And we actually had an incident where I was flying with, on my first deployment, we were picking up I think it was a pretty heavy load, maybe 1,500 pounds. But what happened was we wanted to roll it in the back of the aircraft, but we said, no, let's just put it in a net and we'll carry it. We'll sling it. Well, let me tell you something. We got going and that load became really unstable and just started swaying under the aircraft. And we ended up having, and it was, it was dark out. There was no horizon. And for a couple minutes there, it was not that we were worried, but this is dangerous. And but that was at the end of a 10-hour day, right? Where you're just flying ship to ship to ship all day long. And it was one of those things where you kind of just dropped the ball a little bit. But if we had taken 5-10 minutes, rolled it in the back, it would have been a piece of cake. So anyway, it was designed for cargo, but ended up being, we would use it for all kinds of other missions. We did drone recovery with it. We did search and rescue. On my second deployment, we were a search and rescue crew aboard the USS Tarawa, which was an amphibious assault ship, much like the LHDs. It was the predecessor to the LHDs, like the USS Essex and the USS Wasp. But it was designed also for external loads. We did this thing called VRT-REP, vertical replenishment at sea, where we'd sling loads between, especially the aircraft carrier and supply ship. So that was a big mission for it. Didn't have long legs. You had 2 hours of gas on board. So that was it. 2,500 pounds of gas. But that was the advantage of is, you could put 10 people in the back, like just they'd hop in the back and off you go. The H-60 isn't quite as easy to load in and out like that. So let's see what else was interesting about that aircraft. A lot of people always ask, for what it's worth, does one engine drive the front rotor and one engine drive the back? That's a question you got. The question is, the engines drive a mixed box, which goes to the fore and aft transmissions, and the rotors are synchronized. But
there you go, folks.
That's right. But it was a Boeing Vertol. It was even used as a kind of. You can look this up online. The 46 was actually they thought of using it as a kind of an airline service between New York and other places. There was a civilian version. Kawasaki licensed the build and the design, and the Japanese flew a lot of them. Now most of them have either been retired. Columbia Helicopters, which is a logistics and logging company up in Pacific Northwest, they still use them. And I think they had shipped a couple of them over to Afghanistan. Some department agencies were using them for different missions. Oh, no, it's a completely different aircraft.
Right.
You can take CH-47 Chinook. You can pick up a 46 with a 47.
So completely different.
It's completely different, yes. This aircraft only has a max gross weight of 23,000 pounds. I think a Chinook is 45,000. So the 47, just a couple of little things you can tell. It has the gas tanks run the whole length of the side of the aircraft. The 46 just has these little side tanks here under the wheel wells. That's one of the ways you can tell the difference. Right. Also, a Chinook has 4 landing gear. The 46 only has 3, has tricycle gear. Right. But it is significantly bigger. Yeah, the 47s are huge.
Absolutely.
But that's the primary difference. They also even sounded different. 47 had a much lower, thumpier sound. 46s were more of a, they had a, it's just, they're very different even in sound. I'm not going to try to imitate them.
Yeah. But before we move on to your operational side of things, how many crew did it actually hold? And did it differ on what mission you were actually conducting?
Most of the time it was 4. So pilot or aircraft commander, what we called a second pilot or an H2P, or those would be the pilots up front. And then you had a crew chief and a second crewman. Sometimes you would, because it's a pretty good sized aircraft and they always wanted someone to be able to look on both sides when you were landing, you typically flew with 4. That was pretty standard. I don't know of ever even flying with one crew chief in a 46. I'm sure it happened for maybe on a transport or moving an aircraft, but you always had 4 at a minimum. And the crew chief was the boss in the back. It's amazing how much I miss, like when I fly for fun, I'm always by myself typically. And the thing that I always miss someone to talk to when you were flying, right?
Yeah.
I mean, going on a 2-hour flight, you could talk about anything with your co-pilot, but I had a couple of crew chiefs I was pretty close with, that I admired greatly too. They were really good at their job and they were awesome. And, but they'd sometimes come up between, just check out, they'd come up between the pilot and the co-pilot and have a chat with us or whatever. It was a crew of 4. We also, when we were deployed, we would typically have a rescue swimmer on board. So one of your 2P or your crew chief would be, or both of them would be rescue swimmer. They'd gone to the Navy rescue swimmer school in Pensacola. It's a pretty tough school to get through. And they would, so you were always on a standby, pretty much you were always SAR standby in some capacity during deployments. Yeah. So that was the crew.
But let's talk about, because on your CV, I guess, or your bio you sent me, you spent 2, is it called, in capitals here, Westpac Deployment.
Yes.
What's this about? And can you tell us any memorable stories from your time on them?
Sure.
Tours?
When you were deployed, it was on the West Coast. When you did deployments, you called them Western Pacific or Westpacs. It was just a general term to refer to deploying. And we would typically deploy as a 2 aircraft detachment on a supply ship or a single aircraft detachment on an amphibious ship as a SAR asset. And I did one of each, which was pretty new. And actually at the time, what had happened is they started the SAR detachments because at the time the amphibs were flying Hueys for their SAR aircraft. And that was not a good platform for flying SAR. It didn't have auto hover. It didn't have any real SAR capabilities. And a couple of guys were lost that we actually knew. More than one Huey had crashed doing that mission. So they said, well, let's take the SAR capable 46s that had a SAR package in them. They had a Doppler radar and a big what we called the loud hailer on the side of the aircraft as a loudspeaker, and we deployed those in single aircraft detachments. And that you'd go out with an amphibious ready group. But normally there would be a carrier battle group, a carrier, a couple of cruiser, destroyer, a couple of ammo ships, and you would be a 2 aircraft detachment, and you would do logistics, for the battle group. And you would do this for typically 6 to 8 months. Both of my deployments were 6 months. So the first one was Desert Storm. That would have been December 90 to May 91. And then the following year, I went on another Westpac, this time with the amphibious group on the USS Tarawa with what they called the 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit. So that would be all the Marines deployed on the 4 ships in our ready group. So that would have been 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, which is, an entire Marine battalion, right? 3 companies of Marines. And then you'd have air combat element. And then you would have, and this is what would make up the MEU. You would have a battalion of Marines, a battery of artillery, a composite squadron of, at the time, 6s, Cobras, Hueys, CH-53s, and even Harriers. Oh. And you'd have a SEAL platoon or half of a SEAL platoon. EOD guys, and you get on and you go west. And that was the gist of it. The first deployment was Desert Storm, so we were very busy, flew a lot of hours, had to do did all kinds of missions. One night we got called up and they said, hey, bring these Stinger missiles from this ship to another ship. And so we had to go out in the middle of the night. And I remember that very distinctly because we were flying and you had the oil rigs out there that would burn the gas off.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of dark and just had that going on. And we didn't have night vision goggles. So it was all just flying around 200 feet or below, or maybe you might go up to 500 feet to hope you don't run into anything, and deliver, but most of the jobs were just what we call logistic runs, picking up people, delivering the mail, moving cargo. We would do Holy Helo on Sunday, where we would fly the chaplain around and hoist him up and down off all the ships, because a lot of times the only way to do passenger transfer was just to hover over the back and hoist.
Okay.
So you could hoist, yeah, because we couldn't land on frigates, the smaller frigates. So you'd hover over the back about 25 feet and hoist down, and they would hoist up. And that took time. We had, and so one day we're doing Holy Helo. I'm with my boss, Lieutenant Commander Shaddix, Tony Shaddix, who was a great guy. We're still I'm friends with some of these guys on Facebook to this day, which is kind of neat. But all of a sudden, our NG turbine went to zero. The gauge, the turbine gauge went to zero.
Ooh.
And but we still had the engine running. But one of the things immediately you would go, NG indicator goes to zero. That means we probably just lost an oil pump, because the NG instrument indicator went through the oil pump and onto the engine. Oh, yeah. So we're like, okay, we have about 8 minutes before this engine burns up. We got to get out of here. So we ended up having to, get that hoist off, and get back to our boat before the engine burned up. And we just made it in time. Ooh. So that was we did a single engine. Actually, we ended up flying single engine. We brought the engine back. We didn't shut it down right away, but we ended up doing a single engine landing right onto the deck there. And no hover landing on the back of a ship is a little scary, but we did. It was fine, And it's kind of the other thing that happened on that deployment was we were on a long mission. We were on like over water, like 80 miles, right? 40 to 80 miles is not a big deal over land, but when you got people on board and equipment and you're trying to find ships with, that are radio silent, we had specific limits. We couldn't fly longer than 80 miles over the water if at 40 you didn't have the TACAN for the ship that you were going to. So I'm not kidding. Literally halfway through, it was at JR Pass, and Dave Zimmerman were in the back, and they go, "Yeah, I think we're leaking gas back here." And one of the engines, we had blown a fuel control unit. It was just spraying fuel everywhere. We had passengers in back, and we're literally at halfway point. But it's amazing. Your training just takes over. I wasn't even nervous because I didn't have time to think about it. We just went through our procedure. We called up the carrier. We called up our home ship. We turned around, got our ship to close with us as fast as they could. We ended up, I can't remember. We didn't have to. We just let it run for a while, and I think we singled up on final and landed back safely. But boy, that was terrifying. I thought we were going to just go into fire. Like after it, it wasn't that. You don't think about it until after.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the only other thing we had happen to us was me and my boss were flying around one night. Again, no night vision goggles, 200 feet and below, and you're doing practice night landings. I mean, it's you can't see anything. The ship had changed course, and we're probably on the last flight of the day, last landing, last two, and we just missed the closure rate. We were coming in, and we ended up coming in a little too hot, and ended up having to, do a little nose up action over the deck. But it's just amazing how that stuff could creep on you. When you're flying around at night, there's nothing that it's like flying in a box. You can't see, the water, so you don't know where the wind is, right? You just can't see anything. And so it was it was always fun, but we had a couple of times it get a little nerve wracking, but it was all good. So I did the two cruises. First one, Desert Storm. Second one was in going to the Middle East, back to the Middle East. We ended up in Somalia. So this would have been at the end of '92, around October. We ended up going off the coast of Somalia for a month, and was doing humanitarian missions there. Fun 6-month cruise also. So it was good. We did a lot of different stuff. Actually, we managed to rescue some Iranian merchant seamen after their boat sank in the Straits of Hormuz. That was pretty cool. So my crew chief got a Navy Achievement Medal because he actually jumped in the water and picked them up, and we hoisted them up and brought them home. So that was awesome. And we got our picture in the paper back at North Island, which was kind of cool.